I finally understand that you've been deceiving me all this time. I want a divorce. And make sure to pay the damages I'm going to seek." As he said this, my husband had a triumphant smirk on his face. My in-laws and I were both dumbfounded by the scene. I've had a lot of grievances with my husband, but I've done my best to put up with them. I was planning to make an effort from now on, together with our son. Yet, this man before me is blaming us, accusing us of things that never even happened. I won't put up with it anymore. I don't need someone like him in our life. For our future's sake, I'll cut him off for good. My name is Sarah, and I'm a 30-year-old homemaker. I live with my husband. I'm currently pregnant. My due date is approaching soon. Having moved away from my hometown when I got married, I now live far from my parents, making it hard to quickly rely on them. In the midst of this, my in-laws have been concerned about me, treating me as if I were their own family. While you often hear about troubles with the in-laws, I believe we were free from such issues. But that's not to say that I didn't have my own worries. I'm concerned about my husband. He works at a regular company, but he often comes home late. Sometimes it's past midnight, and whenever I ask him what he was doing, he says there's a lot going on in a working person's life. It's such a nonsensical excuse. Don't women have a lot going on too? Because of the way my husband is, I find it hard to rely on him easily. He's often not home when I need help. I suffer from severe morning sickness, sometimes so bad that I can't move all day. Even then, my husband thinks nothing of going out and drinking late. Since I'm a homemaker, I don't share household chores with him. Everything from cooking to laundry and cleaning is my responsibility. On days when I'm feeling unwell, I can't do all those tasks, and often, I can't even properly take care of myself. Even if I become bedridden due to my lack of energy, it's not like there's anyone to lend me a helping hand. That sense of loneliness left my heart in tatters. It may be hard to rely on us, but remember, we are on your side, Sarah. Feel free to reach out to us anytime. Occasionally, my mother-in-law would visit and say those words to me. It seems that I was looking quite unwell. While it was nice to hear her say that, my in-laws are, after all, not related to me. I often hesitated to rely on them too much, worrying about being a burden. In the end, I couldn't depend on anyone, and had no choice but to endure my loneliness and hardship alone. It was one of those days where my daily struggles had continued. I felt terrible that day, but I absolutely had to take out the trash, so I forced my weary body outside. The trash bag felt heavier than usual, as if it had lead in it. Still, it was something I had to do, so I persevered. In such a condition, I couldn't watch my feet, and ended up tripping over a step. I wasn't able to break my fall properly, and ended up collapsing. I knew I had to get up quickly, but my body wouldn't respond. I hadn't realized it, but I think I was totally exhausted. The feeling of not wanting to get up overpowered me, and I lost consciousness. When I came to, I was in a hospital room. Apparently, a neighbor had called for help, and I had been rushed to the hospital. I underwent a doctor's observation and stayed in the hospital for 3 days before going home. During that time, my husband never came to see how I was doing. When I got home, I found my husband looking displeased. As soon as he saw me, he started yelling loudly, "Don't cause problems for me. You worthless wife." That one line pierced my heart. To my husband, I was nothing but a nuisance, just like trash. Normally, if a wife falls ill, you'd expect a husband to be worried. Wouldn't it be normal to ask if there was anything wrong? My husband, who never once visited me while I was hospitalized. It's hard to express how much anxiety I had to battle alone. It was at this moment that I realized I was nothing more than an afterthought to my husband. And I also came to understand that I had no more love left for him. But I have a son in my belly who does not yet know what the future holds. When my son is born, his father's presence will surely be a necessity. You need money to live in this world. Moreover, I'd hate to limit my son's future by deciding things on my own. Maybe, just maybe, things will change once our son is born. Even if my husband's attitude towards me is bad, he might still show love to our son. I desperately hope so. With that wish deep in my heart, I chose not to divorce my husband. Since then, I've spent every night filled with anxiety. The fear of falling down again, worries about the future, dark farts swirl in my heart. I gradually developed insomnia. Even as I grew more and more haggard, my husband didn't seem to care. I was living through hell, but amidst it all, my son was safely born. I was moved to tears when I heard his loud first cry in the delivery room. It was probably a relief after all the anxious days I had endured. After that, I spent some time hospitalized, but still, my husband never came to visit. Work always took priority, even in times like this. I wished he would be by my side. However, my in-laws frequently visited, and occasionally they brought my husband along. During those times, my husband's face showed clear dissatisfaction, as if he was saying, "I want to leave right now." Seeing my husband like this, my mother-in-law scolded him, "You're a father, aren't you?" But he showed no concern. "It's just how I feel, don't try to control me." He responded as such, completely ignoring her words. What kind of man is he? And why on earth did I ever fall in love with someone like him? I deeply regretted marrying such a worthless person. After being discharged and returning home, my husband, as expected, didn't help with the child care. Although I had lost the weight of pregnancy, juggling child care and housework was still harder than I imagined. My son's frequent night crying meant even less sleep, leaving no time to rest my exhausted body. I'm so done with this. I wanted to run away. Then, one day, my husband said he wanted to talk. He said, "I want to talk to you about something important, and soon. I also want my parents to be there." I was curious about what this important talk might be, but there was no point in objecting, so I agreed. On that day, my husband was in a surprisingly good mood and constantly had his smartphone with him. Seeing this, I had a bad feeling, wondering if perhaps. A few days passed, and the promised day arrived. The doorbell rang, and my in-laws arrived. It seemed like even they didn't know what this conversation was about, expecting it to be good news. As we took our seats, my husband placed a sheet of paper on the table. "I want you to see this," he said. Drawn by his words, we all looked at the paper simultaneously. It appeared to be the results of a DNA test. The results indicated that there was no paternal relationship between my husband and our son. "This child is not mine," he said, glaring at me. But I knew for sure that our son was indeed his child. Even as I tried to argue, my husband refused to listen. "It's clear to me now that you've been deceiving me all this time. I want a divorce. And make sure to pay the damages I'm going to seek." He said this final point, leaving me speechless. Even my in-laws seemed shocked by this unexpected turn of events. I had thought we were finally going to have a proper conversation, but instead, this is what I was confronted with. Indeed, my son and I have been greatly helped by my husband's earnings, but that doesn't justify his attitude. At that moment, I decided that I would get revenge. "So, is it okay if I call the hospital for confirmation?" I asked. Upon hearing this, my husband's face turned pale. He asked, "In spite of all this evidence, you still won't accept it?" "I don't just want to confirm if this test is real or not. At least in my mind, our child is yours." Given my husband's attitude, I could guess that this test result was probably fake. Ignoring my husband's attempt to stop me, I called the number written on the paper. a receptionist quickly answered and agreed to check the records. Soon after, it was revealed that no DNA test had been conducted. My husband refused to accept this fact, insisting this must be some mistake. He kept claiming that I was lying. "She's trying to frame me." He exclaimed this, trying to portray me as the villain. I regretted not realizing sooner that I had been mistakenly trying to make it work with this man. I had thought that having a son would change him. I wanted to believe that as a father, he would do things right. But on reflection, it was clear that was never going to happen. It was futile to expect anything from a person who only thinks of himself. I felt like I had woken up from a long dream. And at the same time, I realized that I didn't need this man in my life. Now, it was my turn to lay out the documents I had prepared on the table. Seeing the brown envelope I placed there, both my husband and my in-laws tilted their heads in confusion. "This is evidence of your infidelity," I said. As I said this, my husband began to panic. It was obvious that he had something to hide. Ignoring him, I proceeded to take out the contents of the brown envelope. Inside were several photographs. They showed my husband being intimate with a woman who was not me. Some photos even showed him entering and leaving hotels known for such rendezvous, leaving no room for excuses. "I've been suspicious of you for a while now. That's why I had your actions investigated. I had always had doubts about my husband. His late-night returns under the pretext of overtime were too frequent to be believable. And his sudden increase in going out for drinks, under the guise of workplace socializing, raised my suspicions. I had been afraid of what it might mean if he really was cheating on me, so I had been hesitant about an actual investigation. However, one day, while he was in the bath, his smartphone, which had been left on the table, suddenly buzzed. It seemed to be a message notification from a woman named Mary, saying, "Can't wait to see you again, eh?" I instinctively picked up my husband's phone. Carelessly, it wasn't locked, and I could easily access what I was looking for. After confirming his infidelity, I hired a detective agency to investigate my husband's activities. I had taken photos of the messages on his smartphone screen, which were said to be sufficient evidence. Soon after, the agency captured photos of my husband enjoying himself with another woman. And that's how these photos came into my possession. "You've been deceiving me," he shouted, his face turning red with anger. To that, I retorted firmly. "If anyone's been deceiving, it's you, not me." My husband retorted with phrases like "but" and "this is too much," trying to criticize me. But I was no longer hurt by his words. Because my love for this man had already ended. Whatever he said, it didn't hurt or bother me anymore. All I could think about was how quickly I wanted this time to end. My husband, unable to contain his anger towards me, was shouting and raging. Seeing that I didn't retaliate only made him more audacious. "You can't live without me," he yelled. "You should have just been quiet and listened to me." As I nonchalantly dismissed my husband's words with a laugh, my father-in-law suddenly stood up and yelled, "This foolish son of mine." Until then, my in-laws had been sitting quietly, but now they turned red with anger and began to confront their son together. "How could you do such an unreasonable thing? I feel so bad for Sarah. We didn't raise you this way. Apologize to Sarah." After being sternly scolded by his parents, my husband attempted to make excuses, saying "but." However, when his parents shouted no excuses, he became tearful and finally said, "I'm sorry." Urged by his parents, my husband knelt down at my feet. "I am truly sorry. Please forgive me," he begged, a stark contrast to the attitude he had shown towards me just moments earlier. My in-laws said to me, "You don't have to forgive him," and so I decided not to. "Let's get a divorce. I will also be asking for alimony, you understand that, right?" At my words, my husband started to shake his head. But upon receiving a stern glare from his parents, he reluctantly agreed, "All right." My in-laws then knelt down before me. "We are truly sorry for our foolish son. Rest assured, we'll make sure he takes full responsibility for this. We apologize for all the hardship you've endured for so long. Please try to find happiness from now on." Their heartfelt words made me feel like they were nothing like the man I was married to. I almost had to doubt if they were really related. My husband remained prostrated throughout. Afterwards, I was able to successfully divorce him. When I handed over the divorce papers, he signed them without any resistance. I had consulted a lawyer, and we thoroughly discussed the alimony. This substantial amount of evidence, combined with the fact that I had suffered from insomnia, resulted in a significant sum. Since I was able to identify my husband's affair partner, I also made sure to seek damages from her. Afterwards, I returned to my parents' home to relax and recuperate. Of course, my son came with me. There was no way I would let a man like my ex-husband have custody. He also agreed to pay child support, which will help in raising our son going forward. I had been troubled for so long, but the end came quite anticlimactically. In hindsight, I regretted not taking action sooner. Afterwards, it seems that my ex-husband was eventually dumped by his affair partner. Apparently, the reason my ex-husband abruptly demanded a divorce that day was because his affair partner had become pregnant and was pressing for marriage. Believing it was his responsibility if the child was his, he chose her when she informed him of her pregnancy. However, it turned out that the child she was carrying was not my ex-husband's. The woman had been involved with other men, and the child was likely one of theirs. It seems she knew this, but decided to claim that it was my ex-husband's child, hoping to secure an easier future. However, it seems that once she realized she would be sued for damages, she ran away. My ex-husband, who had been serious about registering their marriage, was reportedly deeply shocked by this. He stopped going to work and apparently became a recluse at his parents' home. Naturally, my former in-laws didn't have the capacity to take care of their reclusive son. My ex-husband was eventually abandoned and now seems to be living in a factory residence, earning a meager wage. One day, I received a call from an unknown number, and to my surprise, it was my ex-husband. "I can't go on like this anymore. Please, help me." Apparently, he had gone out of his way to borrow someone's smartphone to call me. "I've realized I can't live without you. I'll change my attitude. Please, come back to me," he pleaded. I was exasperated with my ex-husband's desperate pleas and let out a sigh. "What do you mean you can't live without me?" Even if I extended a helping hand now, it was certain that I'd be betrayed again after a while. On the other end of the phone, my ex-husband was crying and begging. I gave him the cold shoulder, replying, "Sorry, but I have no intention of getting back together with you. Please, never contact me again. If you try anything else, I'll consult my lawyer." After saying this, my ex-husband was screaming, "Wait for me," on the other end of the line, but I ignored him and hung up. He kept calling repeatedly from the same number, but I've blocked his calls. I'm planning to visit a mobile shop soon to possibly get a new phone. I've been thinking about changing my current model, and this might be the right time to buy something new. As for me, I've started working at a certain company since then. There's a good daycare near my parents' home, where I can leave my son. On busy work days, I sometimes rely on my parents, but my coworkers are mostly understanding, so I rarely stay too late. While balancing time with my son, I'm also able to save for the future. I hold my son dear to my heart. I want to wholeheartedly support him in whatever path he chooses in the future. If he ever strays from the proper path, like my ex-husband did, then as a mother, I want to do everything I can to help him. Hurting people without a second thought is not right. And it's even worse not to feel remorse about it. Everyone makes mistakes. My son probably will too. That's why, as a mother, I always want to teach him the importance of sincerity towards others.